Is it safe to unplug a blinking USB drive after safely ejecting it? There is a lot of information about how to safely unplug USB hard drives. However, the articles tend to stop at the part where the operating system says it is safe to unplug, or where you're sure nothing is writing to the drive, etc. Relevant setup: Windows 10 PC or Windows 10 notebook. External USB hard drive, not a USB stick. Click Eject External USB 3.0. Wait for Safe to Remove Hardware notice. After the operating system declares that it is safe to unplug a USB hard drive, a LED on the drive blinks about 10 times before the drive shuts down. I've used a number of external 1TB to 4TB HDDs by Toshiba and Seagate, and they all consistently blink their LEDs about 10 times when ejected. The blinking happens after the OS says it is safe to remove hardware. Although the OS is limited to seeing the completed buffer flush, whereas the drive's firmware can detect when the writes have completed, the 10 blinks happen even when the drive is just plugged in and immediately ejected with no writes at all. Likewise, it's still the same 10 blinks when the drive is written to extensively, then it ejected. Some theories. The 10 blinks are just a courtesy to make it easier to identify which drive was ejected when multiple drives are plugged into a single computer. There is a fixed latency between the OS flushing its write buffers and the writes getting physically encoded. This would explain why any non-zero amount of writes produces a fixed delay on eject. However, the 10 blinks still take place if there was a long delay between writing and ejecting, or if there wasn't any, intentional, writing at all. The 10 blinks represent a safety margin for the drive to park its heads. That sounds like a rather long time just to park heads, though, with each blink lasting about a second. So, is it safe to unplug the hard drive while its LED is still blinking? I've tried finding an authoritative answer, even checking on Seagate's and Toshiba's websites, looking at the datasheet in the case of Toshiba. I'm looking for answers that reference credible sources regarding what the drive does during the shutdown blinking sequence, to understand whether unplugging during that sequence is safe. Here are some other areas I checked. Searching Google, is it safe to unplug flashing USB? I got a whole bunch of tips about how to safely unplug USB drives, but nothing to do with the USB. Searching Google, is it safe to unplug blinking plus LED USB? Some other posts come up, mainly to do with troubleshooting, but nothing to do with the routine 10 blinks on eject. Searching super user, USB, hard drive, Windows 10, eject. This produces 7 results, or 8 results if I replace hard drive with external hard drive, mainly about problems. Nothing about the routine 10 blinks on eject.
Usually it is, do what the user manual says. If the drive's firmware is written correctly, it announces to Windows that it's ready to be ejected when it is. It is therefore safe to do so. If the drive's firmware is written incorrectly, it may announce that it's ready to be ejected while still busy with important stuff. It's therefore not safe to eject it, but then, it is never truly safe to eject, or do anything else, with a drive which has a buggy firmware. For instance, here is a random HDD manual which says, click the hardware and eject media icon. A pop-up message box will appear listing the external devices connected to your computer. Select a Toshiba drive to eject. After a few seconds, you will get the notification that it is now safe to remove the device. Click OK and you can unplug the drive now. Note there's no mention of LED activity. Indeed, you should check the manual of your drive, and if it says wait for the LED to blink out eject in Morse code, you should absolutely do that. I'm yet to see such a manual though. If you absolutely need your data to be there, verify the integrity of the data you have written, and make backups. Otherwise, when your data on a portable HDD is gone, the fact that you have waited until the LED blinks 10 times will be of little consolation.
I haven't seen any official source that describes the reason for blinking disk indicator after safely remove, so what I write here is only based on general knowledge and observation. This happens for some disks because of the way that the firmware interacts with the operating system. Windows announces that the device is safe to remove once it has flushed all its data from the memory cache and signaled the device's firmware to spin down. The firmware itself may take some time to process the spin down command. Many USB hard drives also incorporate cache memory that will be lost if the disk is brutally powered down. The firmware will need its own time to terminate all writes and to spin down the disk. While it is doing that, the disk's indicator will blink. It is certainly not safe to unplug the disk and power it down while the lights are blinking, since they indicate that the firmware is actively doing something. Some disks can recover from an abrupt power down by using non-volatile cache memory, so they can pick up when the disk is powered up from where they stopped. Beginning from Windows 10 version 1809, it is safe to unplug the disk whenever the disk is not blinking. Safely remove is no longer strictly necessary, although I would still recommend it.
No, it is not completely safe. It should be, and in almost all cases it will be, but you cannot be absolutely sure in any sense. Sadly, life is not always what it should be. In my personal experience, only a few times in several years, and specifically not with Windows 10, I remember a data loss or file system corruption removed quickly immediately after the go-ahead of the system. But it only happened with a second person ready to remove the USB and run away, immediately, after the go-ahead of the system and when writing operations were required at the very last moment. The blinking indicates some activities in the device, or at least in hardware, not OS-related, communication to the user. The blinking of some Seagate models is an error code, AVID, communication. You may check if, with your model, that way of blinking, short or long pulses, has a special meaning. Usually 8 short pulses mean the byte 0, and 0 is the exit code of the program with no error at all. TLDR. Premise. In general, the scope of the question is so wide that there cannot be other single, universally valid answers. Too many models and brands may be involved. You must refer to both the manual of your HDD and the instructions of the operating system and drivers. Consider the most restrictive, and yet you will not be able to be absolutely safe. Understanding what happens. The OS was reading/writing on the USB drive, HDD, SSD. You ask to remove this drive from the system. The OS stops/refuses the new I/O operation request from its programs, waits the ending of the current I/O operations and checks if some lock is active on the device. When the device communicates that all the I/O operations are ended, the OS will release the device declaring that you can safely remove the device. In the ideal world, it should be enough. The problem is, the OS can answer only on the basis of what the device itself answered. Usually both the device firmware and the OS drivers are closed source, so you have to rely on their documentation and on the license agreements. The problem is that both sides are often valued considering their performances. They may rely on the fact that between the go-ahead of the system and the average human reaction time needed to unplug the device, there usually is enough time for the modern devices to finish the internal operations in progress. Moreover, the responsibility of each site is limited by the license terms. Limitations written to safeguard the company as much as it is possible, even if they knew or should have known about the possibility of the damages. See below for Windows 10, but you can find similar for the device's producers. So, since they discharge the consequences in advance and are evaluated on their performances, it is up to you to decide to what extent you can trust them and you will feel safe. When you have at least one site that is open source, you can read what happens. From a comment of another answer. It returns when the drive claims it has flushed its own cache to the platters. You can read the SQLite source code or some NSFW comments in the Linux kernel source code about drives that are, shall we say, less than honest in the interest of improving benchmark figures. Safe and its meanings. Now we can even specify in which sense you want to be safe. Data transfer safe. As I really experienced, you may believe to have saved your data on the external drive, but it was not all saved, or the fact, or equivalent, was not updated. And next time you check you will find some sector to fix or that some files are not present. Write disk cache enabled may have played its role in the past. Hardware safe. On some external HDD drive you can feel, and I did, that for some seconds after the system said you can remove, they still spin. You can even hear the vibrations. Unplugging the cable you interrupt the energy supply. If the plates are not spinning at their maximum speed, it can really occur that there is not enough energy to park the head safely onto the parking ramp, too. Privacy safe. Okay, let's suppose that the firmware is moving some data from a location to another. Some SSD do this in background to rotate the sectors used. Some HDD firmware may do the same on sector that presented a reading problem on a sector. Before it copies the data in the new sector, then updates the fact, or equivalent, finally frees the old sector or if required deletes the data from it. If the process is interrupted before the end, you can finish with the sector in which that data is copied, but it is not reported and managed correctly. If that was sensible data, you are exposed to a security risk. Legally/economically safe. You are protected for the data loss up to what fixed in the license terms. After that you will be able to prove the guilt and the culprit. Conclusion. Wait some second more. Colin. From Win 10 license term 9.d3. The damage exclusions and remedy limitations in this agreement apply even if repair, replacement, or a refund does not fully compensate you for any losses, if Microsoft, or the device manufacturer or installer, knew or should have known about the possibility of the damages, or if the remedy fails of its essential purpose. Moreover, if your local law allows you to recover damages from Microsoft, or the device manufacturer or installer, even though this agreement does not, you cannot recover more than you paid for the software, or up to $50 used if you acquired the software for no charge.
Data is only guaranteed safe when electrical activity of external drive has stopped. Blinking shows that the external drive is still receiving electric power from the computer, therefore we cannot be sure that some data operation will not happen. In Linux this is easy to make sure, because unmount and detach are two separate stages. Windows does not have power off command but only eject, which is similar to unmount. Therefore in Windows in some cases it might be better to shut down the whole computer, as that guarantees that the external drive is also free of electric power.
If you want to support Legendary, please contact us.